Greeting viewers, it's great to have you join us today as we review one of the newest books in the market, The Frontlines of Peace. Before we proceed, kindly note that this webinar is being recorded. You're welcome to submit your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A session will take place at the end of our discussion today. Also note that the audio and video sharing screen share features are disabled. I now welcome Dr. Murugi Dirango to lead us to the next session. Welcome, Dr. Dirango.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As Pauline has said, my name is Murugi Dirango, and I'm the Director of Columbia Global Center, Nairobi. CGC Nairobi is part of Columbia University's global network of centers, which aim to create opportunities for research and scholarship. Our center serves as a regional hub for research and collaboration as part of Columbia University's strategy to achieve a global presence, and links the African continent to Columbia's scientific rigor, technological innovation, and academic leadership. Today, we are reviewing the book titled Frontline of Peace by Professor Séverine Autesserre. Séverine will be in conversation with a regional peace building and reconciliation expert, Mr. Daniel Munyoki-Wadhome. We would like to sincerely apologize to you, our esteemed participants, that one of our panelists, Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, could not attend today's webinar due to unanticipated events. Let me now introduce Séverine. Séverine is a professor of political science, specializing in international relations and African studies at Barnard College, Columbia University. She works on civil wars, peace building, peacekeeping, and humanitarian aid. Séverine's latest book, The Frontlines of Peace, The Insider's Guide to Changing the World, examines what works in building peace after mass violence. It draws on fieldwork in 12 different conflict zones, including Colombia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Somaliland, and has been released by Oxford University Press. Previously, her project focused on the everyday elements that influence peace-building interventions on the ground. It included extensive fieldwork in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and briefer comparative research in Burundi, Cyprus, Israel and the Palestinian territories, South Sudan, and Timor-Leste. Séverine has won numerous scholarly awards and fellowships. She holds a postdoctorate from Yale University and a PhD in political science from New York University, and a master's degree in international relations and political science from Columbia University and Science Po. So I take this opportunity, it's a delight to welcome Séverine to give her talk. Welcome, Séverine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dirango, for organizing this event. Thank you, Liliane, Pauline, David, for organizing this event. Thanks to all of you for inviting me. It's absolutely wonderful to be, the book was released yesterday, so it's the first official book launch party that we have, and it's wonderful to do it with the Columbia Global Centers in Africa, because I've been on the faculty steering committee of the Columbia Global Centers in Africa for several years before I went on sabbatical, and so it's wonderful to see you again and to be back with you, even if virtually. And I understand that people are joining us from all over the world today, which is absolutely fantastic. As for me, I'm talking to you from my living room in New York City. Because of the COVID pandemic, I'm still not allowed to work from my office, but it doesn't matter because I'm absolutely thrilled to talk with you about my brand new book, The Frontlines of Peace. And so I'm going to share my screen and try to show you a few photos. So The Frontlines of Peace is a book about hope. It's a book about the ordinary yet extraordinary individuals and communities that have found effective ways to confront violence. And so to start, I want to tell you a story about these kinds of people. It's a story that takes place in Congo, in the midst of one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. In 2007, a little boy named Luca was kidnapped and forced to work for an armed group and for rebels just like the ones that you see on in my photo. And Luca was so small at the time that he couldn't even hold a rifle. So his commanders would march him up front and use him as a human shield. Somehow, Luca survived, and after 3 years with the armed group, the militia commanders released him and he was sent back home to his mother, Justine. But Luca had trouble assimilating. He hated school. He was often hungry because his mom didn't have much money. And he still believed what his commanders had drilled into him, that the only way to survive was to use violence. So Luca kept running away to join militias. The only time he felt safe was when he had a gun in his hands. He was 8, and this was the only life that he knew. Meanwhile, in the United States, a young Indian American woman named Vijaya Thakur was working for various aid organizations focused on Congo. And Vijaya was growing very uncomfortable with her colleagues' work because her colleagues used the traditional top-down approach to peace building. They relied on outsider skills and expertise, and as a result, they ended up harming the very people they wanted to help. So for instance, most of them believed that violence in Congo was due to the illegal exploitation of minerals like coltan, which the young men in my photo are mining. And so Vijaya's colleagues spent their time and efforts advocating for new laws on conflict minerals, but the new regulations deprived many vulnerable people of their jobs, and these people had to join armed groups as a way to survive. And so whenever Vijaya traveled to Congo, she started asking ordinary citizens what they believed. And this is a photo of her doing just that. And eventually, Vijaya decided to try something in the village where Justine and Luca were living. In partnership with local activists, Vijaya organized lengthy meetings and workshops so that the residents would develop their own analysis of the conflicts they face and decide what the best responses would be. And the first part of that plan was for Vijaya and her fellow activists to give out $40 each to a few village women, including Justine, who used the money to start small businesses like tailoring or donor shop, businesses of the kind that you see in my photos. The businesses took off, and soon the participants had enough money to implement the second part of their plans. So they installed taps for clean drinking water, and they organized trainings so that the teachers would learn how to curb ethnic violence rather than fueling it. And eventually, they lobbied local authorities for protection and better services. So Luca now had 3 meals a day, shoes without holes, and role models who didn't use violence to survive and gain power. And like Luca, all of the villagers were safer and healthier. And one day, Vijaya was talking with Justine, and Justine kept using the word success to refer to the whole initiative. It was because Luca had turned 13, and for the first time in his life, he was speaking in the future tense. He had stopped trying to run away all the time, and he was making plans, peaceful plans within his community. He now wanted to hold a pencil instead of a gun. And now you see where the cover artist found her inspiration for the cover of my book. Vijaya decided to create the Resolve Network, which has used this approach to help more than 7,000 people over the past 10 years, all individuals at risk of being recruited by armed groups, and more than half of them former combatants like Luca. So as you know, militias have formed and reformed in Congo. The pressure to remobilize has been enormous, but not a single person participating in the Resolve program has either started or gone back to fighting. And to me, this story is inspiring, and it's also very telling because there are big differences between the way most peace-building organizations work and what Vijaya did. So to start, Vijaya decided to build peace from the grassroots by relying on insiders instead of always focusing on elites and leaders in capital cities and headquarters. Even more importantly, Vijaya didn't come and impose her beliefs, and that way she avoided doing more harm than good. Unlike so many people before her, Vijaya was humble, respectful, and she put ordinary citizens in the driver's seat. So peace builders who work like Vijaya are a small minority in the aid world, but they exist. I've found them within many different organizations, working in many different countries. And the work that they do is incredibly important because unfortunately, there are many people who face the kind of terrible circumstances that Justin and Luca were facing. 1.5 billion people live under the threat of violence in more than 50 conflict zones around the world, in the countries you see in red on my map. And so peace building is a crucial task for many states and international institutions. And when I say peace building, I really mean any and all actions that help promote peace before, during, and after a conflict. The thing is, our templates and techniques for approaching war and peace just don't work. Afghanistan, Colombia, Congo, Syria, Ukraine, Myanmar, we've heard the same story many times before. There was violence, the United Nations got involved, donor countries pledged millions in assistance, warring parties called for ceasefires, they signed agreements, held elections, and the headlines praised peace. And then a week or two later, sometimes just days later, violence flared up again. Often it had never actually ended, and in many cases, it lasted for years after. And our newspapers continue to run headlines like the ones you see in my slide. More than half of all ongoing wars have already lasted for more than 20 years. Within the past 5 years, wars have spawned the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And inhabitants of war-torn countries and onlookers from the outside are fed up with the apparent inability of governments, peacekeepers, and international institutions to end violence. And there has been plenty of discussion about what has gone wrong when we've tried to stop wars in the past. But now, I think it's time to ask what has gone right. And it turns out that elections don't build peace, and democracy itself may not be the golden ticket, at least not in the short term. Contrary to what most politicians preach, building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive international interventions. Instead, it often involves giving power to ordinary citizens. Ultimately, many successful examples of peace building in the past few years have involved innovative grassroots initiatives led by local people and at times supported by foreigners, like the South African officer you see in my photo, and often using methods shunned by the international elite. So rather than focusing on abstract peace agreements, negotiations between governments and rebel leaders, or handshakes between presidents, The Frontlines of Peace details the concrete everyday actions that actually make a difference on the ground. So some of these are bizarre, some are creative, some involve age-old traditions, and some are just common sense. My book explains how peace building can actually work so that we can finally improve the lives of billions of people. And I show that to end violence from war and also to address violent conflicts at home, whether home is New York City or Nairobi. We have to fundamentally change the way we view and build peace. And this argument builds on more than 20 years of work in 12 different conflict zones, the countries you see in red on the map, as well as more than 800 in-depth interviews that I conducted with politicians, warlords, survivors, ordinary people, and outside observers. And so if you look at my slide, here you see me conducting interviews, and in this photo, I'm conducting, in the photo with me wearing a blue helmet cap, you see me conducting participant observations. So let me tell you a story. That day, I was really happy. I thought, oh, yay, I'm fitting in, I'm such a good ethnographer. The thing is that I'm not a man, and there were only men on this military base. And also, I felt that there was something wrong with my bulletproof jacket. So I went patrolling for several hours, and the bulletproof jacket was heavy, it was uncomfortable, and most importantly, it didn't protect my heart or any of my vital organs. And I thought, well, it's just because I'm not that big, I'm not that tall, and I'm a woman, so, just not made for me. And it's just when we were back to the base that the Indian officer, one of the Indian officers told me, you've been wearing it backward. Anyway, I still got really good material that day. In the book, I first tell the stories of ordinary people, grassroots activists, and local leaders who did manage to make a difference in war zones. Then I describe the limitations of the conventional way to build peace, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually exclude local citizens and ordinary people and grassroots activists. Drawing on these stories, I suggest a better way to help reestablish peace during and after armed conflict. And in the conclusion, I show how residents of ostensibly peaceful countries can use the lessons from the book to help decrease tensions and violence in their own communities, so ranging from inner city conflicts to political and religious divisions. So let me tell you the story of Ichiri, which is quite literally an island of peace in Congo. For the past 25 years, one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II has raged around Ichiri. And despite the presence of one of the largest and one of the most expensive peacekeeping missions in the world, several million people have died and hundreds continue to die every day. But for the past 20 years, Ichiri itself has avoided mass violence. So the island is stunningly beautiful, as you can see in the photo I took when I was there a couple of years ago. But what makes the place even more noteworthy and the peace even more surprising is that Ichiri Island contains all of the same preconditions for violence that have fueled generalized fighting in other parts of Congo. Ichiri has a geostrategic location. It's located right at the border between Congo and Rwanda, two countries that have been at war regularly since the 1990s. Ichiri also has mineral resources, ethnic tensions, lack of state authority, extreme poverty, local conflict over land and traditional power, and many other features that have led to generalized fighting in other parts of Congo. And what's fascinating about Ichiri is that the island is peaceful because of the active, everyday involvement of all of its citizens, including those you can see on my slides, and including the poorest and least powerful ones. So it's not the state, the army, or the police who manage to control tensions, and it's not foreign peace builders either. It is the members of the community themselves. They do that by fostering what they call a culture of peace, by organizing in grassroots associations and local structures that help resolve conflicts, and by drawing on strong beliefs that help deter violence by both insiders and outsiders, such as blood pacts. Blood pacts are traditional promises between two parties who agree never to hurt each other. The story of Ichiri shows that local community resources can build peace better than the usual elite agreements and outside interventions. And foreign peace builders can help in this process. Take the teams of the Life and Peace Institute in Congo. So LPI is a Swedish peacebuilding organization that works in various conflict zones and usually focuses on working at the grassroots. The LPI Congo team bases its action on in-depth local expertise, and they reject universal approaches to peace building. They rely on local employees, and these employees are supervised by a few foreigners, and these foreigners often have extensive pre-existing country knowledge. LPI doesn't implement programs directly. Instead, it works with and through a few hand-picked local organizations, and the main role of these organizations is to support people on the ground. These local organizations empower ordinary citizens to develop their own analysis of their community's conflict, agree on the most feasible answer, like they're doing in the photo that you see, and then implement the solutions. So you see the difference with the usual way to build peace in conflict zones. In the LPI model, it's not foreigners based in headquarters and capital cities who conceive, design, and implement peace building programs. It's not national or provincial elites either, and it's not the state or the government. Instead, it is the members of the community themselves, including ordinary people, who conceive, design, and implement peace-building programs with the help of LPI and its local partners. And so I'll give you a concrete example so that you can see how it works in practice. For several years, there was a deadly conflict in the Ruzizi Plain in eastern Congo. It led to a lot of death, a lot of suffering, and the involvement of Congolese militias, Congolese leaders, and the Rwandan government. And so in 2007, 3 Congolese organizations decided to address these tensions with the help of LPI. And for 3 years, they focused on understanding what the problem was. They organized a lot of small and large-scale meetings, like the ones you see in my photo. And in these meetings, they included everyone. Warlords, army officers, soldiers, ordinary citizens, ministers, farmers, women's groups, civil society activists, everyone. And they progressively realized that the conflict was not so much a proxy war between Congo and Rwanda, as we interveners thought at the time, but rather it was a conflict between herders and farmers, because cattle often destroyed crops. The farmers retaliated by killing the herders, whose families then reached out to local militias who went on to attack the farmers' communities, and so on and so forth. And so all of the people involved, the ordinary people, the combatants, they all designed solutions that they thought would work, to address the problems that they viewed at the root of the violence. So, for instance, they established routes for moving cattle with minimal disruption to farmers. They erected public signposts like the ones you see in my photo to really clearly mark the routes that the herders should take with their cattle. They also established mediation committees to smooth out any tensions that may arise. And in these mediation committees, they included representatives of both farmers and herders. Because, you know, with cattle, even with this kind of really, really clear signs, you can't always make sure that they stay on the right path. So obviously, there were issues, setbacks, challenges. But to make a long story short, while all of the large conferences and elite agreements had never really made a difference before on the ground, local residents saw tangible results once LPI and its local partners got involved. For several years, the seasonal migration of cattle took place with little violence. Dozens of militiamen handed in their weapons. And ethnic groups that were fighting slowly started working and living together. They resumed working and living together. For instance, they resumed using the same market, for instance. So outsiders can help reestablish peace. But the catch is that to really help, they can't continue acting the way they usually do. Because there are countless limitations with the conventional way to build peace in war zones, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually exclude local citizens and ordinary people. The Peace Inc. standard approach to peace building relies on detrimental, misleading assumptions, like the idea that only top-down intervention can end armed violence. The idea that that all good things come together. So for instance, that democracy and elections naturally lead to peace. And the idea that only foreigners have the required skills and expertise to build peace. So take the way my own career in international aid got started. When I was 23, I got my very first job out of graduate school as assistant country director with Médecins du Monde, Doctors of the World in Kosovo. And so that's in the photo, that's me at the time, and that's my wonderful husband, Philip, who, by the way, owns the copyright of many of the photos I'm showing you today. So when I arrived in Kosovo, I didn't speak Albanian or Serbo-Croatian. Philip didn't either. I had virtually no knowledge of Kosovo history, politics, and culture. I started reading my first book about the Balkan on the way there, but the flight was too short, so I never finished that book. But I got the job because I spoke decent English and I had 2 fancy master's degrees, a good training in political analysis, and some field experience in a variety of post-war places and developing countries. In hindsight, I feel terrible when I think about my Kosovo assistant at the time. His name was Narim. My job was to analyze the political and humanitarian situation in Kosovo and write reports for my supervisors, but it was Narim who had the knowledge that I lacked. Narim had 20 years experience analyzing political issues. He had a tremendous knowledge of the Balkans' history, politics, and culture. He had lived in Kosovo all his life. He was also much older and much wiser than I was, but I was the outsider, so I was in charge. And the thing is, I had never supervised anyone in my life before. I was 23. So I had no idea how to deal with him. And eventually, I found a way to keep him busy. I asked him to compile and translate clippings from the local press. I can still see him every morning religiously posting his work on our bulletin board, and none of my colleagues read it. Even I often didn't get the time to read it. That was such a waste of time, energy, and talent. And I realized afterward that it was not a stroke of good luck for me and bad luck for Nerim. That was a typical situation for foreign peace builders. Most foreign peace builders believe that local people do not have what it takes to build peace, that they are incompetent, corrupt, violent, otherwise they wouldn't be at war. And in contrast, foreign peace builders believe that they have the required skills and expertise. To them, what makes a good peace builder is education and work experience in specialized topics like gender or human rights or election organization, and if possible, having worked in a variety of conflict zones. In contrast, and although there are exceptions, the knowledge of country specialists is much less valued, and the knowledge of local people is usually trivialized. The result is that in virtually all aid and peace building organizations, foreigners fill the management positions and local people make up the lower level staff. And the local people often don't speak the local languages, and they often have no in-depth understanding of local cultures, societies, and politics, just like me in Kosovo. And I'll tell you a story that to me encapsulates all of that. In 2004, rebels took over the city of Bukavu, the city in the photo that I'm showing you now. And the rebels went on a looting, raping, and killing spree. And at a point, a little boy and his mother saw several soldiers enter the house just next to theirs. They heard shouts and screams. It was obvious that their neighbor was about to be raped. So the little boy ran to seek help at the nearby peacekeeping base, but when he arrived, the sentry on duty was a Uruguayan soldier who didn't speak Swahili and didn't speak French. So the little boy was panicking. He tried and tried to communicate what was happening, but still the peacekeeper didn't understand. And finally, the soldier broke into a large smile and he said, he made a sign like, yes, I understand, please wait. He went inside the base and he came back a few minutes later with a pack of cookies that he proudly handed to the boy. So yeah, outsiders do not always understand what's happening, and relying exclusively on them can be really problematic. Another frequent issue with our standard approach to peace building is that in many conflict zones, the conflict revolve around political, social, and economic stakes that are distinctively local. And when I say local, I really mean at the level of the individual, the family, the clan, the community, the ethnic group. So our usual top-down approach to peace building that focuses on elites and leaders in capital cities is not and cannot be enough. And I realized that during one of my very first trips to Congo. 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, I met this woman who was my age. Her name was Isabel. Local militias had attacked Isabel's village. They had killed many men, they had raped many women, they had looted everything. And then they wanted to take Isabel, but her husband stepped in and he said, no, please don't take Isabel, take me instead. So he had gone to the forest with the militias and Isabel never saw him again. And the reason why the militias had attacked Isabel's village was not because of anything related to national and international tensions like the war between Congo and Rwanda. No, it was because the rebels wanted to take the land that the villagers needed to get food, to cultivate food, and to survive. And Isabel's story has stayed in my mind all these years because it embodies the awful consequences of local conflicts that foreign peace builders so often ignore. So I'm happy to elaborate on all of the problems with our standard approach to peace during the discussion if you're interested, but I want to use the 10-15 minutes that I have left to tell you how we can change that. And I really think that we need to learn from success stories instead of always focusing on challenges, issues, and failures. So these past few years, I've looked for cases of what I call surprising peace, unlikely peace, places where everything conspires to cause violence, and yet somehow you have peace. And I've found places like that all over the world, in Afghanistan, Colombia, Congo, Israel and the Palestinian territory, Somalia, for instance, in the 2 villages where I took the photos you see on your slide. And the case that I like best is the example of Somaliland. So there is a really interesting contrast between, on the one hand, Somalia, which, as you know, is extremely violent and has some of the highest rankings in the world's least desirable category, most corrupt country, second most failed state, etc. And on the other hand, you have this autonomous region in the north of Somalia that is called Somaliland, and that went through a devastating independence war with Somalia in the late 1980s and in the 1990s, a war that destroyed nearly 90% of the towns, some of which still haven't been rebuilt, as you can see in the photo I took when I was there a couple of years ago. But for the past 20 years, Somaliland has experienced very little violence, very little terrorism, and it now has a well-functioning state, decent public services, as you can see in my photo of the capital, Hargeisa, and even some kind of functioning democracy. And of course, there are many reasons for this difference, but the key one is that the usual Peace Inc., outsiders-led, top-down approach to peace building prevailed in the rest of Somalia, while Somaliland benefited from sustained grassroots peace-building initiatives that were led by insiders, by Somalilanders themselves, like the people you see in my photos. And the experience of Somaliland shows us that local people can help build peace, not only on a small scale, like in Ichiri, but also over a large territory and a quasi-state. And the good news is that outsiders can help in this process. And they can support local efforts without falling into the same old tired relationships between insiders and outsiders, and without destroying local peace efforts, as interveners so often do. Because in my research, I found a lot of original, out-of-the-box approaches by interveners who did manage to put local people in the driver's seat and to actually make a difference on the ground. And I talk a lot about these model peace builders in the book. They are named Vijaya Thakur, Peter Van Holden, Banuel Tumbas, James Cambery, Lemak Bowe. I could go on and on. They come from all over the world and they work for very different organizations in very different countries, but they have a few things in common. They don't think that as outsiders, they know better, that they have the right theory, skills, and expertise, or that they bring the ideal solutions to people's problems. Instead, they respect local residents, they listen to them, and they're open-minded. They understand that other people may have a different understanding of peace, democracy, development, and different priorities. They also know the local context well. They have extensive local networks and they speak at least some of the local languages. They stay on site for years, sometimes decades. They're really in it for the long run. They don't place themselves at the forefront of these efforts and they don't put their logos everywhere. Instead, they remain low profile and they turn the spotlight on the achievements of their local partners, local staff, local organizations, ordinary people. They're flexible. They keep adapting their strategies based on the result and feedback they get and the way the situation evolves. And lastly, they understand that sometimes there are hard choices to make because all good things do not go together. And so sometimes we may have to choose between worthy goals, for instance, between peace and democracy or peace and justice. And the best interveners understand that they shouldn't be the ones to make these choices. The people who have to live with the consequences of a decision should be the ones making it. And by way of conclusion, there is one last thing that I want to mention. All of these ideas, all of these lessons from conflict zones can help us address not only tensions and violence in war zones, but also tensions in our own communities, including for those of us who work in ostensibly peaceful conflict countries and want to decrease political, religious, racial or ethnic tensions around us. So, for instance, we know that violence is rising in the United States, in my country. So of course, it's nowhere near the level of violence that we see in Somalia and Congo, thankfully. But still, there are three things that all of the residents of any country can learn in order to help decrease tensions and violence in our own communities. To start, we can develop informal relationships with our opponents, whether they are political, religious, or cultural opponents. It is by listening, talking, and bonding over shared interests that the residents have managed to keep violence at bay in the zones of peace that I've told you about, like my two friends have done here in Ichiri. And in the United States, it's also the strategy used by people like Christian Picciolini, who's a former gang leader, whom you can see on my slide, and also Daryl Davis, the African-American jazz musician you see in this photo. By developing personal relationships with members of white extremist group, Christian and Daryl have managed to convince hundreds of people to renounce hatred. So for us, sport groups, religious groups, art associations, trade unions, these are all good places where we can start building common ground with our opponents. We can also use the specific elements of our own culture to help resolve tensions. You remember how the residents of Ichiri and Somaliland build on their own cultures and beliefs to decrease violence around them. Well, closer to my home in Chicago, in the United States, there was a group of women who were really fed up with seeing so much violence and bloodshed around them. So they decided to hang out on street corners. They brought folding chairs and they sat on them for hours and hours. And the thing is, in Chicago, nobody wants to kill someone in front of their own mothers. So the number of shootings and killings in their community has decreased a lot. And the last thing we can all do is to support bottom-up grassroots associations with time, money, efforts, whatever we can spare. You remember how important such local associations were in helping build a heaven of peace in Ichiri? Well, grassroots associations have proven just as effective in other parts of the world. For instance, in the United States, the organization Cure Violence has helped reduce shooting and killing by up to 73%. And they've done that by using the same kind of bottom-up, insiders-led approach that we've seen at work in Ichiri and Somaliland. And of course, our new administration and Congress in the United States have an important role to play, and so have politicians and governments all over the world. But the important point is that whether at home or abroad, we sorely need more individuals like Vijaya and Justin. We sorely need more organizations that work like Resolve and the Life and Peace Institute, and more programs that follow the basic principles that I've told you about. Because it's with individuals and programs like these that we can help the 1.5 billion people who live under the threat of violence in conflict zones around the world, and that we can also decrease tensions and violence in our own communities. So all of these ideas are not magic ones, but because they take into account deeply rooted causes of conflict, they can definitely be game changers. So if you want to know more about all of that, please do feel free to ask a question in the chat. And I understand that that Liliane is going to read us the questions. And I really enjoy the Q&A part of this kind of events. It's usually my favorite part. So please do ask a question now. You can also follow me afterwards on social media. Twitter is best. That's where I'm the most active. You can find the full text, free online version, the full text of all of my articles on my webpage, severineautesserre.com. And I've also put a lot of resources that I think some of you may enjoy. And of course, my 3 books have a lot more detailed stories and ideas about everything that we've discussed today. And I understand, well, okay, I think that the Frontlines of Peace is actually the best of my 3 books. So I'd be honored if you would check it out. And I understand that when you received the invitation for the webinar, you also received a 30% discount code. So please feel free to take advantage of that. And thank you so much for listening.
Wow, wow. Thank you, Séverine. That was wonderful, captivating, exhilarating, and hopeful, especially the stories on what is happening on the ground, despite the really sad ones. For me, I think it speaks to the timely and the relevance and definitely the purpose of the book. And more specifically, I was captivated by the signpost in Yangombe, which speaks to our context in Kenya. And one rhetoric question for me is, how can I be a front line of peace? How can I be at the front line in Kenya, in wherever I step? And I really appreciate this wonderful book. It's a must read for me. I would kindly request that you stop sharing so that we could.
Yes.
And so we will go ahead and take some time for questions now. And just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions in the Q&A box. I've seen some and we're doing very well. Also remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as posted by our staff. And so before we review the questions, let me introduce our next panelist, Mr. Daniel Munyoki-Wagome, who is a gender specialist and training coordinator at the International Peace Support Training Center, where he oversees the training and research activities under the gender program. He has also participated in multi-dimensional peace support operations in different peace missions in Africa, He is the National Trainer on Sexual and Gender-Based Violence for the International Conference of the Great Lakes Region, Regional Training Facility on STBV, Kampala and Uganda. He's a roving facilitator at and on gender issues for Eastern Africa Standby Force, ESF. And then also Rwanda Peace Academy, Finnish Defense Forces International Center, and the Defense Staff College, Kenya. He's the chairperson of the Technical Working Group for the Development of National Police Service, one-stop centers. So we'll have some questions, and before that, I will request Mr. Mudome, if you can just give us something.
So hello, Prof, and Lillian and the team that is following us on this. I'm happy to join you a bit late, though, but as we say, it's better late than never. And I'm on board now, and I'm excited to read this book, which is about the Frontlines of Peace. I don't know whether it should be Frontlines of Peace or Conflict, but peace is better than the front lines of conflict. And from where I sit and from where I work every day, you know, we run extensive programs on peace support operations. So the term we use in my world here is peace support operations, yeah, which captures all those activities as articulated by Professor Séverine. And reading the book, there's some good things that peace builders will take out of it. Some things that challenge peace builders, some things that challenge outsiders as they deploy to missions, whether they're deploying as a military, the police, or a civilian, whichever deployment you're taking, there are some things that you can take there in your deployment. And one of the things, or cross-cutting theme in this book, this will happen to read it. The cross-cutting theme in this book is the advocacy for bottom-up peace building, which appreciates the role of the local people, the role of the grassroots. I don't know where the grass is. Yeah, the grassroots. Yeah, we still need to interrogate this concept of grassroots, but essentially the role of the local people in finding solutions to their problems. Yeah, but all in all, what I've also captured in the book, and which is, I would say, is a good practice, is that in as much as we are advocating for grassroots peace building, or what we may call indigenous peace building, in Kenya, we have a concept which we have developed some training around called community peace building, you know, around the same idea. We call it community peace building at the International Peace Supporting Training. So it's a program which you train, and we go to the grassroots, go to the communities, and we train them under trees, and they tell us what approaches they use to bring peace. Because the issue of peace building is not a new concept. Conflicts have been there, and solutions are being found. And so we need to tap to that indigenous knowledge about what has worked traditionally in resolving conflicts. Very important. So I was saying that in as much as we are saying we need these indigenous approaches to peace building, the book also appreciates that we need external support. And I would say where necessary, that we need outsiders to come, probably with their resources, to support what the local people are doing. Because the local people have the knowledge, they have the ideas, but maybe the only limitation is a shortage of resources, yeah, so that they can do whatever they want to do. And I would say that is what the outsiders may bring on the table. Knowledge, the people have it, the resources, we may be limited, and so we need the external support. So the advocacy, the push, the drive, the crusade, if I can use that word, the crusade for grassroots peace building is something which I like about the book, and which many around me will also appreciate. But the question that someone in peace support operations will ask is, looking at the UN, yeah, which gives mandates for peace support operations or for peace operations. And now, in this case, the UN, in a context which has a conflict, could be DRC, could be Afghanistan, will be seen as an outsider, and it brings so many outsiders, police, military, civilians coming into the country. Then how can we balance that influence so that we do not, we do not belittle the input of the local people by bringing so much of this external influence through the UN mandating process, because the UN must mandate, then the peace operations process kicks off, and so many foreigners will come to this country in different names and different shapes. That is the balance I think that we need to interrogate further. How can we balance that? Because the UN overall has that mandate, yes. And even our African Union, we cannot deploy. We also depend on the UN to authorize any deployment that we want to do, or any mission that we want to form. And the other issue that we need to, that I appreciate in this book from a peace support operations is the issue of situational awareness. Yeah, that as you plan to deploy out there, like Prof, the way she has gone to DRC and many other places, situational awareness. Are you landing in that country with some knowledge about it, understanding the dynamics, situational awareness, so that we avoid those mistakes that we may make and make our peace operations fail or become an embarrassment to the UN and to the world. So situational awareness is very important. And my advice would be that one of the ways is through thorough pre-deployment preparation in country and even within the mission setup, pre-deployment training. We call it pre-deployment training or preparation. How prepared are we before we deploy and go out there, either to do DDR, to do SSR, whatever we are going to do? Are we ready? Do we understand the dynamics of that particular country? Will you go out there in Somalia and start shaking women's hands and you're a man? Basic things like those ones. They're very important for the outsiders as they go to attempt to bring peace. So situational awareness is very important, and I agree with Prof about when she raises the issue, and I could point out the issue of situational awareness, that sometimes we are not aware of where we are. We are just deploying. And again, there's something else that I like about this book, and the gender lens in the scenarios, in the examples that Prof has given. As a gender specialist, I must speak about that gender lens, and especially the role of women in peace building, which is appreciated here. Citing the case of Liberia, for instance, citing the case of Vijaya, Justine, and the rest of the women who have been mentioned in this book. The role of women in peace building needs to be appreciated. Why? Because women have unique capacities to bring peace, unique capacities which men lack. And that is why a gender mind like myself will always speak about the UN Security Council resolution 1325. People understand it. If you don't, just look at it. UN Security Council number 1325 or 2000. Yeah? What does it say about the role of women in peace and security? So the role of women, even at that grassroots level, is very important. And this is something that I've seen work around here, even in Kenya. in programs, mass team between Kenya, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, where we have that element of peace building and bringing women to the peace building architecture. And for the interest of those who may want to understand, like the Kenyan way of grassroots peace building, we have what we call the local peace committees. They used to be called district peace committees. Yeah, peace committees, which are formed from the elementary, the basic level, from the local, small village level, and which now have women on board so that their perspectives can be brought and their needs can be addressed in the issue. And for you, Prof, you may be interested to follow, even on YouTube, the Wajir story. The Wajir story will also give you a dimension about the role of women in peace building. The Wajir story, if you search it, I'm sure you'll find it. Something which I also appreciate about the book is about the need for conflict analysis. Conflict analysis is integral in understanding and resolving conflict, because how will you fight something you don't understand? Simple, very basic. Yeah? A conflict analysis is very important because you'll be able to identify who is who in this thing, so that you know who to involve and at what point are you going to involve. Conflict analysis has been emphasized in this. I liked your on the issue of challenges that peace builders may face. There was a question of the length of time that peace builders are spending in the mission or in their tour, the tour of duty, as we call it. Because if you are deployed for 6 months or 1 year, how much can you do? You know, and your colleagues, when they come in, are they able to pick up from where you left? You know, that question of the length of tour of duty or the deployment is something that I captured, and it's a question that we need to interrogate more and more. There's a concept in the challenges that I picked, and I think it is something which I've put here in my highlights, called hope burnout. I think by the humanitarians or the aid workers, yeah? Hope burnout. That I think at some point the humanitarians will get tired, will get some burnout, some fatigue because of the weight of the things they do, the magnitude of the issues they're facing. The issue of hope burnout is something, it's a concept which I picked from your book, among other challenges which are outlined in your book. In conclusion, there's something which I'll use maybe as a quote from your book, that foreign peace builders are necessary, but need to work with the local people. And that goes in line with the last quote that I'm taking from your book, and which I can use with your permission in my briefings with different people, that peace efforts must draw on the knowledge, perspectives, network, and assets of both insiders and outsiders. Yeah, that synergy is necessary. That synergy is necessary. It's about synergy. It's about synergy. Obviously, alive to the dynamics of how much weight is being drawn from the insiders and how much weight is drawn from the outsiders. That balance is a debate. That balance is a debate. So thank you so much. I have so many insights, but for now, let me rest my case there.
Thank you, Mr. Munyoki, for those brilliant and explained review of the book. And so there are so many questions, many. Séverine, that could tell you to how the book has inspired our viewers and participants. And so I'll start without further ado to the first question too, maybe. I'll be combining them up so that we at least also look out on our time. So the first one from Phil Vernon, does your book imply that progress towards peace is being wrongly framed and thus measured by the mainstream international organizations? And Faith Mbulo is asking, I feel that you are adopting a post-liberal approach to peace building, but at the same time, Lederach's liberal peace. How would you describe this approach?
Okay, so I'll answer each question separately. So as for Phil Vernon's question, well, progress toward peace, the way it's framed currently is very much, did we get presidents and rebel leaders and big time elites and governments to sign peace agreements? And if so, every time we have a new peace agreement, we've all seen like the big headlines in the newspapers and the big declarations by our leaders saying, oh, there is peace. Like, how many times have we read that just about South Sudan? Oh, there is peace in South Sudan. Oh, no, people are still fighting. And then there is a new peace agreement, and then a new peace agreement, and then a new peace agreement. And so, yes, when we frame peace as whether or not elites sign peace agreements, to me, that's not really meaningful for people on the ground, because these kind of abstract high-level peace agreements really don't mean a lot for people on the ground. There are other ways to frame peace, and so we would have to go through every single organization, and even within the United Nations, each different agency has a different way, and each different person within each mainstream organization has a different way of understanding peace. But very often, again, it's based on elites, on leaders, on what's happening, like institutionally speaking, on whether we have peace agreements and these kind of things. And so what few people focus on, I mean, some organizations focus on that, but very few people in organization focus on what's really happening in rural villages, outside of capital cities, outside of headquarters. What's the daily life like for people in rural areas? Do they feel that there is peace? What is their definition of peace? And do I have time, Lillian? Do I have time to tell a story that I really like? It's going to be a 1-minute story. Okay. And then I'll answer the other question. So it's about the definition of peace. So there was, I'm going to take you out of Africa. I'm going to take you to Latin America, and I'm going to take you to Colombia. And in Colombia, one of the very high-level negotiator told me that he spent years working on a peace agreement between the government and the main rebel group, the FARC. And, he worked and worked and worked, and finally a peace agreement was signed in 2016. And so he worked and worked to implement the peace agreement, and the peace agreement fell apart. And it was not working. Violence was continuing in rural areas. Things were not working. And so he traveled around the country, and at a point he was in a rural village, really, really far away from the capital city, Bogota. And he started talking with the local populations who were very poor. And he told them, I'm really sorry. I want to apologize. I've done everything I could to bring peace to your area. I really thought that with this big high-level peace agreement, things would work, and it didn't work. And I'm really, really so sorry. And one of the village women stands up and she looks at him and she said, no, I think you're wrong. And he looks at her and he said, why? And she says, well, I'm actually really thankful for what you've done, because I see a big improvement now. And he says, but there is still violence around you. And she says, oh, no, but let me tell you, before, when I went to bed, I used to go to bed all dressed and I couldn't turn the light off. Now I can sleep in my pajamas. Because I can sleep in my pajamas, there is peace in your area. Her definition of peace was thinking, do I feel safe enough to undress at night, to put on my pajamas, to turn off the light and to have a good night's sleep? And there are plenty of definitions of peace that are like that. And to go back to your question, Phil, to me, that's the kind of definition of peace that really matters, is whether people who are experiencing the conflict, what do they feel? Do they feel that there is peace in their area, or do they feel that there has been an improvement, or do they feel that things are just unraveling? And so yes, progress toward peace is rarely measured according to local people's definition, although we can do that. And there are like fantastic research by the Everyday Peace Indicator project that shows how we can do that. Anyway, I see Lilian is, is asking me to move on. So about Faith's question, yes, it is. I don't know how to describe this approach. I built on Lederach. He actually wrote a very nice endorsement for my book, and I've been highly influenced by his thoughts. I've also been highly influenced by the thought of Oliver Richmond, Roger McGinty, and people who work on the post-liberal peace. I don't like this kind of labels. It's usually labels that people put on my work rather than labels that I claim. For me, I take everything that I find useful and relevant in different theoretical boxes, and I use them to develop the best analysis I possibly can.
Thank you. And so we move to J9 question on, I think it's a rhetoric question. The approach that works is Ubuntu based, native, natural to Africa. And she's congratulating you for globalizing it. So she's asking whether the world needs to learn from Africa, if you can approve
that's a good rhetorical question, the kind of rhetorical questions I really like. Yes, the world needs to learn from Africa. Actually, I wrote a piece in the Washington Post a couple of years ago, one of the first articles based on this project, and it was something like, here is what we can all learn from Congo. Or I can't remember the title, but like something like what we can all learn from Congo. The idea is that we can all learn from ordinary residents of conflict zones. That's really important. We can all learn from success stories, from the places that work, and there are hopeful cases. There are things that work in many conflict zones, whether in Africa, in Latin America, or in Asia. So yes, definitely, the world needs to learn from Africa, and more importantly, the world needs to learn from the residents of peaceful places who have found a ways to decrease violence around them.
Okay, I would like Mr. Daniel Wathome to address this one, and maybe you could also add a point on it. From Michael Nest, have you observed a particular funding model by outsiders and donors that seems more effective than others for promoting local ideas in peace building activities? Are there a particular funding model that outsiders are picking up? Now, Mr. Daniel Wathome, you could have a shot on that.
All right, Lilian, if I got your question, it was about, is it donor-driven
funding models? Yeah. Is there a particular funding model by outsiders and donors that seems more effective than others for promoting local peace-building activities?
It's a rather lengthy or wide question. Huh? It's about fundraising or resource mobilization.
Yes.
Because one of the realities on the ground is that the local people may not have enough resources. I've not said no resources. I've said not enough resources to support the peace building initiatives. And so they will depend on the outsiders to support the initiatives. The only challenge is that when the external or the outsiders come in, they will take the front seat, not the back seat, in driving the peace building initiative, because they have the assets, to the extent that the local people will not see whatever little they have as important in the peace building process. But a synergized kind of a resource pool by different donors working in a single area or in one area of a conflict zone is the best model because it helps to save resources and utilize them the best way possible, instead of having very disjointed kind of resource application in the same area, leading to duplication of activities, and at the end of the day, wastage of resources. So my piece of advice would be just let's pull our resources together. If we are working in Kivu, for instance, let's work together and pull our resources together for the benefit of the people. And always let us encourage the local people to see what they have as important. Then if it's just the human resource, the energy the time they volunteer, then let them appreciate that there's something they can put on the table, and it will be useful for sustainability of the peace initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Wadome. That's explicit. So, Séverine, there are a lot of beautiful and wonderful feedbacks on your book. I may not read all of them. We'll take our time, review them, and maybe just post them to you so that you can see how you've influenced the world. So the next question is on one difficulty Bruno sees is outsider-supported local and grassroots peace building. Is that also a very political thing for outsiders to bypass capital cities and elites? Do you see it as a problem? So I think he's asking on, let me read that question. One difficulty I see with outsider-supported local and grassroots peace building is that it's also a very political, legal thing for outsiders to bypass capital cities and elites. Do you see this as a problem for outsiders to bypass capital cities and elites as they are undertaking grassroots peace building activities?
So yes and no. The first one is that it depends who we're talking about. So yes, for United Nations agencies and for international organizations that are government-based, that are state-based, that are inter-country organizations, yes, they have to take the step of not bypassing, but going further than just working with the government. But the thing is that first, there are many non-governmental organizations and foundations that work already directly with local organizations, grassroots organizations, and ordinary citizens on the ground. So for all of them, it's not even a question. It's completely fine. And the other thing is that even when we look at the United Nations, or when we look at the African Union, which are usually the organizations where people tell me, oh, but I have to work with the government because that's in the DNA of my organization. That's what we're set up to do. I tell them, but no, actually, you keep working. You work all the time with people on the ground. For example, look at the humanitarian agencies, whether we're talking about OCHA, whether we're talking about UNDP, UN Habitat. There are plenty of UN organizations that actually work with local people on the ground, that have found a way to continue interacting with the government, because you're a state-based organization, and it's really important that you maintain ties with governments, but also that have found ways to work with local people on the ground. And so to me, when I hear, oh, but it's a political, and we have political and legal constraints, and we can't really engage with grassroots and civil society organizations, I think that yes, you can. That there are plenty of people who do that, even within MONUSCO, for instance, the UN mission in Congo. Plenty of people manage to do that. So yes, it is a political decision in the sense that there needs to be a decision to do that. And I've seen in the history of many different UN peacekeeping missions that sometimes leaders arrive and they make that decisions and they try to push their colleagues to work at the grassroots. And so it's a decision that can be made, to work, but it's a decision that has to be made.
Okay, thank you, Séverine. And Kamali is asking, what inspired this change of heart and turn of focus in the field of peace? to validating and valuing local knowledges. I think she's asking what inspired you, and then what next to envisage for peace education. What might peace education look like? So you can speak to the inspiration and what next, the peace building process.
So the inspiration, actually, it's not a change of heart in the sense that there have been a lot of people who've worked on that for years. I mean, the idea, we can go back to like ancient philosophers who've been talking about how to interact as human being, and I cite some of them in my book. And again, one of the participants mentioned Jean-Paul Lederac. He's been talking about that for several years, and we've talked about Ubuntu as well. That has been around for a very long time. So and there has been there is an increasing attention to local peace building, to the power of ordinary citizens and local actors in the field of peace building, what we call the local turn in peace building. And so to me, it's not a change of heart in terms of, oh, I decided to focus on local because I've been doing that for most of my academic career. It's more the change of heart was I've been focusing on failure, on issues, on challenges, on setbacks, on things that didn't work for my first two books and for the first like 15-20 years of my academic career. And now I decided that I wanted to focus on what works. And what inspired that change of heart, the desire to focus on success stories, on things that actually work, is because whenever I was presenting my research, everybody, in this kind of seminars, except that at the time they were in person, but when I was presenting my research, very often people ask me, well, okay, I completely agree with all of the issues, all of the challenges that you describe, but where do we go from there? What works? Like, what can we do? Do you have models we can follow? And so that's what the new book is about, is showing what are the models that we can follow, the things that work, what we can learn. And that leads very well into your question about what's next for peace education. Again, peace education is taught in very, very different ways all over the world, and even within different different universities and within the same country, there are really different ways to teach it. But what I think, like we're now in peace education, we're now focusing more on local knowledge, local people, etc. And that's why you remember the slide that I showed you with my green silhouette and the thought bubbles. These are the things that we need to focus on in peace education. So for instance, reminding people to be humble. Like, it's not because they have a wonderful degree from Columbia University or from, the best university or from Makerere University. I mean, from one of the leading universities in the world. It's not because they have a master's or even a PhD that they know better than local people, that they have the ideal solutions, that they have all of the relevant skills. So, that it's an attitude. Be humble. Go there for the long term. Don't, think that you're going to hop from country to country to country to country, like most peace builders do these days. And also, like, really learn, and it goes back to what Mr. Wetham was saying before, the importance of understanding the context, the long-term involvement, so that you really understand what's going on around you. So investing, as you're learning peace education, also investing in learning about a country, its culture, its institutions, its politics, its society, its language, and then spending time in that country so that eventually you develop the local understanding and the local networks that you need. And I could go on and on. The idea that not all good things come together are really important as well. But I'll stop because Lilian, I know, wants me to be brief in my answers.
Okay, I would request. It would be interesting to hear what Mr. Wadoma would say to this question, since some of the questions seems focused on your book specifically. So, Mr. Wadoma, you could have a shot on what's next for peace education in Kenya, in Africa, maybe?
Peace education is important, and I think one of the innovative strategies that in Kenya and across the region we have spoken about is like the use of schools for peace building, use of schools, and that means the use of children to speak about peace, to do skits about peace, and there are initiatives which have worked in Kenya, like among the Samburu and their neighbors who have been in conflict from time to time. So peace education is something that we need to incorporate in our education system. And that means a revisit to the curriculum we use so that we can have an element of speaking about peace from that elementary, that basic level as we rise up in the academic cadres, because people like myself maybe encountered the lessons about peace at the university, maybe, yeah. Not to mean that peace education should not be something for consideration at the very basic level. So it is something that needs to start from that early level, those formative years, and peace education should continue all the way, including even the adult learning processes in different countries. And something to talk about peace education, giving an example like what we do at the International Peace Appointment Training Center, is that peace and conflict issues can be taught to each and every person, irrespective of their gender, their age, their educational status, or their whichever status in society. And I'll give an example about this. In the program which I said about community peace building, where we have engaged men and women from across Ethiopia, across Uganda and Kenya, who share the borders, and there are always conflicts around resources and a few other things like around Marsabit and Moyale of Kenya, is that we have worked with local men and women who are not educated at all. They are not, they are illiterate. They don't know how to read and write as much as we do. And so we get a way of speaking this message to these men and women in the now it is Swahili is now national, Lilian, is now a national language. And so
yes,
we don't see language as a barrier to pass this message. So we use, you can imagine teaching all 2 weeks in Kenya or across Ethiopia in that local language, using either the interpreters, translation, and making it as simple as possible so that people can understand this peace message. So that when we talk about conflict analysis and the conflict tree, you can imagine using very local language to be able to understand the conflict and be able now to find remedies to the conflict. So peace education, I would say it should be part and parcel of our education system. And also in the informal setups, we should seek a way, or find a way of passing this message of peace. And I can see here my friend Florence is saying our Ministry of Education has something as a policy on peace education in our country, which maybe other countries could emulate and see how we are doing it. Okay, I thank you, Lilian and Prof.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of questions streaming in. This is an interesting topic. And so because of time, I would wish us and maybe to kindly apologize to our viewers. We had promised to stop at 6:30 and it's already past 1. And so I think we'll wind up at this point. So I think it's time for us to close, and thank you everyone. I appreciate you for being here and thank you for joining us. And I hope to see you next time in another webinar, and we'll keep you posted soon. For me, my highlight has been one of the quotes from Severine's book. Peace building rests on the courage and wisdom of those people closest to conflict, and we must invest in them in ways that dignify their work and commitment. This is a must read for me, Séverine. Thank you so much. Wonderful work. Bye, our viewers.
Thank you to everyone, and I apologize in advance if I'm not able to answer to all of the questions. I saw that there were a lot of questions in the chat, and I really hope that if I didn't answer them during the 1.5 hours that we have today, you can find the answer in my new book, because of course it has a lot more details and stories.
Okay, thank you, Séverine. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Lillian. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.